you mentioned in your work how I'll use the royal we of which I'll think of just that as teaching and learning folk can learn from game designers.
Oh yeah.
First off, what are some of your favorite games?
I have done I've done whole presentations on why I think Plants vs. Zombies is an amazing masterclass in design.
Okay. I have
Uh,
not played that. Why is it an amazing masterclass in design?
there are actually some really great presentations that the game designer he has one about like a game I think it was the title was something along the lines of like a game my mother could play.
Sure.
Or designing
Yeah.
so my mother could play or something like that.
Hmm.
And he explains all of the little bits of scaffolding they did to because if you play like a really high level of Plants vs. Zombies, there's like 9 million things going on in the screen. It's a tower defense game, and so
Okay.
there's a house, and there's zombies who are going to attack the house, and you put out plants, and the plants like shoot different things at the zombies. That's the
Oh.
short version of what this game is.
Okay. Sounds good.
Which is the category of game that is tower defense. And they're cute zombies. They're cute plants and things like that. It's very adorable. It's not scary zombies at all. But the he has some videos where he's I think with like at the GDC conference and some other places where he explains kind of the process that they went through to scaffold people into this game. So there's
Yeah.
no upfront how to use the game really at all. It's very much this like, okay, you're going to start with a yard where there's just one little row and there's a couple little zombies and there's a couple little plants. And then you figure out how this all works, right? And then they'll add in two more rows, and then it gets a little bit more complicated. And then they'll go to the full 5 rows, which is the game board for the, or 6 rows or whatever it is for the game board for the rest of the game. Um, um, and or more, I can't remember, but you get
Yeah.
the idea.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so then they do this really beautiful kind of like ramping up of the difficulty levels, which is kind of, pure Csikszentmihalyi flow state stuff, right? Where you're always kind of keeping people on the top edge of their ability. And if they don't succeed, they can keep playing that level again until they, build some skills and get a little bit more automatic with some of these things or get a little bit more strategic with how they place their plants and, all this kind of stuff to be able to pass these levels.
Yeah.
And there was a great kind of in the explanation of how they were making this, there's a great graph where they were showing wins, losses, repeats, I think, and or start overs. And so they had this perfect graph where it was like they were almost, you pretty much can't lose the first level, like it's
Yep.
kind of impossible. And then
Hmm.
the difficulty kind of ramps up over time. And when they would see something where a level was like really, like way harder than it should be for where it was, they would go in and they would adjust the gameplay. And so, in
Oh.
terms of being able to kind of think about how do I get you to practice the skills here that you're going to need here and then you're going to need there. And so it's pretty amazing how carefully they design for this kind of skill development and practice design and leveling up and just kind of constantly keeping people on the edge of a difficulty level because you don't want it to be too easy because then it's boring, but you don't want it to be
Hmm.
too hard
Yep.
because it's frustrating.
Yeah.
I think anybody who's played any video games has had the experience of like immediately abandoning because like the first level you're like, I don't know, I just crashed into 9 things and I can't figure out what I'm doing.
Yep.
Like I only paid $1.99 for this, so it's not worth me investing a whole lot in figuring this out. Um, I have some friends who have told me that Baba, I think it's Baba is You is the game. It's this apparently very
Oh.
cool, creative game. And I still can't, I've tried once or twice to get past the first level and I can't figure it out. And, which is fine, but like, there's plenty of places on the internet that will tell me, but
Hmm.
that feels a little bit like admitting defeat. But at some point, I'm going to get back to this, and I will. If I have to like get somebody to explain it to me, I'll try to so I can get past the first level and I can actually start playing it and get a little bit better at it because I believe that it's a great game. I just haven't played it myself. But But yeah, Plants vs. Zombies is a game that I think is fabulous. I used to also use Diner Dash. That's another casual game from
Oh,
back in the
okay.
day. I'm dating myself. These are old games, but I think they were just unbelievably well designed in terms of how do they guide you through the
Hmm.
onboarding experience and how do they teach you how to play the game by playing it. And those are some things that I think are really very useful and interesting when we think about the design of other kinds of digital learning environments.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the idea of, again, scaffolding content, supporting learners along the way, the
Mm-hmm.
ideas of making sure it's not so easy, whatever is happening, so that it's just boring
Mm-hmm.
versus um, so obtuse. So it's like, well, I don't know what's going on. I'm dropping this course because that didn't make
Mm-hmm.
any sense. So it's just
Right.
no great ideas that in a digital modality, in a big old lecture hall modality, just great things that we can draw from there. I love it.
Yeah. And I mean, I have over and over seen people who are new to learning design want to throw the tricky problems in right at the beginning.
Mm,
And it's like, you know what? It might be good to let the learners be a little bit successful before you start throwing the tricky problems at them. Because if you start with a tricky problem, then I mean, I understand like it feels like an interesting challenge to you, but you also know this topic really well. So maybe
yeah.
not. But then you also don't want to go too easy because then people are bored and they feel pandered to, and that's not good either.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So this challenge of like how to right size something so that it's an interesting challenge, but not too tricky or too overwhelming or too obscure
Yeah.
is actually a really hard problem. Like, I mean, that's a tough thing to, and again, that's where user testing really comes into
Yep.
play and things
Yep.
like that. One of the things that I saw a lot, because there's certainly still learning games out there and people designing learning games, but there was a huge kind of enthusiasm for them, like 2010s, give or take, it's sort of that era. And one of the things that I saw over and over again was the assumption that, well, it's just a game. It can't be that hard to design. I'm like, no, that's not. I mean, I think maybe we know that better now, but at
Yeah.
the time I saw that a lot, right?
Mm,
And there's a great quote by Eric Zimmerman, who's done a lot on like video game education and also video games for education,
yeah.
um, where he said people were content to transfer the style of the game without really understanding the substance of what made the game work.
Yes.
And so that's been something I've seen a lot of, right? Like we make it look like a video game, like a board game board, and that'll be fun for people, right? Well, I saw purported game engines that you advance a step, you answer a multiple choice question, then you advance another step and you may answer another multiple choice question. And you get to like walk across the screen by the time you're done if you've answered all the multiple choice questions. Well, it's not a game. It's a multiple choice quiz
Yeah. Yeah.
with window dressing. so
Uh-huh.
so that's the like this sort of whole kind of leveling up of challenges and building skills in order to be able to get to higher levels. There's like short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. There's a lot of structure that's in game design and a lot of like mechanics and strategies and things like that make
Yeah.
games interesting and fun. But this is not easy. Like lots of people have designed a lot of bad games out there in the world with
Hmm.
much bigger budgets than we ever have in learning
Yeah.
design. And
Yeah.
so the assumption that it's like a simple thing to do is
Uh-huh.
um, not not correct.
Yeah. No,
But,
I'm just taking the idea of, I'm old enough to remember going to Blockbuster Video. On again for people not of a certain age, it's where you would go on Friday nights and you'd rent the new whatever was in stock
yeah,
of
yeah, you
video
and me
games or
both.
movies.
Right.
Absolutely. Um, and I'm just picturing, and so much is like, well, this looks interesting. Let's give it a try. And I'm picturing like whatever the worst of the random things that would have been picked up, but let's replace the characters with U.S. presidents. So like this will be a fun way for the kids to learn all about the U.S. presidents. Like that sounds like the worst experience like I could ever imagine.
Yeah.
So I appreciate those ideas about like, yeah, game design needs to be really well done. Don't, again, to use that word bludgeon again, don't bludgeon our learners with like something we found, whether or not it's good, and just kind of hope for the best.
Ellen Burns Johnson. I'm pretty sure she's with eLearning Brothers. They were demoing a game at DevLearn last fall
Hmm,
that was kind of a like a hidden object game for teaching about like it was for I think it was an epidemiology thing. Like they were trying to
sure.
identify different ways to test for diseases and things like that. And so they had it set up as kind of a mystery format. And you were trying to figure out, like it was a little bit like a clue game, but you were trying to figure out who was most likely to have like this virus infection or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was a really nice example of kind of like, some of that was window dressing because obviously they had these character designs and all of these kinds of things. But I mean, I think they built enough of the game, and I'm not opposed to some window dressing. It just can't be all that you're doing. It
Yep.
has to
Yep.
be. It can look cool. Cool looking stuff is nice, but it also needs to have some of these underlying things. And I think they had done a really lovely job of kind of building in some of those underlying things to try to figure that out. I taught a project management class to undergraduates, and I used to do a thing at the end of the semester where typically like about half of my class was sort of serious about project management and that they maybe were going to do project management as part of their job responsibilities. The other
Yeah.
half were like, it's a required class, I had to take it.
Yep.
And so I had an option for your end of term assignment. You could either create kind of a project template that you could use to do project management going forward, or you could create a project management game. And it divided pretty evenly between the people who like were actually serious about it versus the
Hmm.
people who were like, it's a required class. But they did like project management Clue and project management Jenga. And we had one with like little cars where you crashed into project
Yeah.
obstacles. We had a lot of fabulous there was project management Twister. That was pretty funny. And they got to eat, but they had to incorporate like all the topics from
Mhm.
the class
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the honest truth is, like, the gameplay usually resolved itself into multiple choice questions again.
Hmm.
But like, my goal was not actually a good like project management learning game. My goal was give you an activity where you would review all the content for the
Yes.
semester and kind of
Yes.
revisit it
Hmm.
all and think about what are you going to, and so like the game would work pretty well for that,
Yeah.
as with the template activity and things like that. And, a couple of them were actually pretty good, like project management Clue, like, so and so did it with the scope change in the coffee room. Actually worked surprisingly well. And the metaphor, and certainly the Jenga metaphor actually like kind of carries over for project management and things like that. So,
Yeah. Massive props for alternative assessments, multimodal assessments. Because again, when we think about like what are we wanting, students to be able to do, it's more them demonstrating their skills and knowledge and less like, well, they wrote a 5-page paper in APA.
and this particular class, they had done, it was a project based class where they were actually
Mm,
working with a client project throughout that was
yeah.
associated with a different design studio class too. And so they'd kind of done all the heavy lifting by the end of the semester. So at the
Yeah.
end of the semester, my only serious goal was to give them something that was going to allow them to kind of just review the content and
Hmm.
reprocess it and kind of contextualize it so that they could use it going forward. And so I didn't care if they created like the most amazing
Yeah.
project management game. I just wanted them to re-engage with all the material, and so yeah, it worked pretty well for that.
Love it.
So.
Just love it.
Join us for the conclusion as Julie shares exciting ideas for the future of teaching and learning.